As I watched my daughter-in-law, Karen, call security and point a finger at me like I was some kind of intruder, my heart sank. Just moments before, we had all sat down at the table, the aroma of roasted turkey and homemade stuffing wafting through the air. It should have been another Sunday family dinner, a tradition I've cherished since my late husband and I started it decades ago. But now, there I was, a so-called beggar at my own family's table, being ushered away like I was less than a stranger. How did it come to this? Karen was once the sweet girl who visited with my son, Robert, bringing apple pies and stories from her childhood in Ohio. Yet, over time, her smiles turned into pursed lips, and warm hugs into cold, polite nods. It wasn't always like this, and as the weight of her judgmental gaze seemed to penetrate me, I couldn't help but wonder when the shift had happened. Routine has always been my anchor, especially in my golden years. Each day starts with a walk through the neighborhood, greeting neighbors and reminiscing about the days when my children were young, their laughter echoing through our home. I often spend afternoons sorting through old photographs, my fingers tracing the edges of memories I'll forever cherish. I'd hoped these family dinners would bring that sense of closeness back, but little did I know they would become a battleground. If you'd asked me years ago if I could imagine this rift, I would have laughed it off. After all, family dinners were meant to be filled with joyous clatter, not accusations and fear. But here we are, and I find myself questioning if we can ever mend this broken bond. It breaks me, knowing family can change so drastically. This is the story of how a beloved tradition became a painful fracture. If you believe that even the strongest family ties can be tested, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell. You're going to want to see how this story unfolds and justice finds its way to the dinner table. As the security guard approached, his heavy boots echoing against the hardwood floor of my own dining room, I felt a lump form in my throat. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table, the same table where I'd carved pumpkins with my grandchildren, where I'd served countless Thanksgiving meals, where my late husband, George, had once proposed a toast to family forever. Now, that sacred space felt like a foreign land, and I, an unwelcome trespasser. Karen's voice, sharp and cold as a winter wind, cut through the murmurs of the family still seated, pretending not to notice the spectacle unfolding before them. "Please, just get her out of here. She's disrupting our dinner," she said, her tone dripping with disdain, as if I were a stray dog who'd wandered in off the street. I wanted to scream, to remind her that this was my home, the house George and I had built with every penny we'd saved, every dream we'd nurtured. The walls were painted with the laughter of our children, the shelves lined with photographs of birthdays and graduations. But as the guard's hand hovered near my arm, I swallowed my pride. I couldn't bear the thought of being physically dragged out in front of my family, my son Robert, my grandchildren, even the neighbors who'd sometimes joined us for dessert. So, I stood, my knees shaky, and shuffled toward the door, Karen's piercing gaze following me like a spotlight. Outside, the cool evening air hit my face, a stark contrast to the warmth I'd left behind. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around me, the familiar scent of lavender from my garden doing little to soothe the ache in my chest. How had it come to this? How had Karen, the girl who'd once sat at my kitchen counter helping me roll out pie dough, become this venomous woman who saw me as nothing more than a burden? I replayed the last few years in my mind, searching for the moment it all went wrong. Was it after George passed, when I'd leaned on Robert and Karen a little more for company? Was it when I'd gifted them the down payment for their new house, hoping it would secure their future, only to watch Karen's gratitude morph into entitlement? I couldn't pinpoint the exact day, but I knew the shift had been gradual, insidious. It started with small things, microaggressions, as the younger folks call them. Karen would make offhand comments about how old folks shouldn't be left alone, implying I was a liability. She'd rearrange my kitchen cabinets without asking, claiming it was for my own good, as if I couldn't find my own pots and pans after 50 years in this house. She'd roll her eyes when I shared stories of the past, muttering under her breath about how I lived in another century. Each jab was subtle, barely noticeable on its own, But over time, they piled up like bricks, building a wall between us. And Robert, my sweet boy, where was he in all this? I glanced back at the house, the glow of the dining room window framing the silhouettes of my family. I could see him there, head bowed, fork in hand, as if nothing had happened. My heart twisted at the sight. Robert had always been the peacemaker, the one who avoided conflict at all costs. Even as a child, he'd hide in his room when George and I argued over trivial things like bills or chores. Now, as a grown man, he seemed just as unwilling to stand up to Karen. I'd seen it time and again how he'd shrink under her sharp words, how he'd mumble apologies on her behalf, how he'd look at me with those sad, helpless eyes, as if to say, "I'm sorry, Mom, but what can I do?" His passivity hurt almost as much as Karen's cruelty. He was my son, my protector once, but now he was a bystander in my humiliation. I trudged down the driveway, my worn-out loafers scuffing against the pavement, and made my way to the small bench by the mailboxes spot where I often sat to watch the world go by. This neighborhood, with its tidy lawns and familiar faces, had been my sanctuary for decades. George and I had chosen this house not just for its size or its price, but for what it represented: stability, legacy, a place where our family could always return. The house wasn't just brick and mortar. It was a symbol of everything we'd built together, everything I'd fought to preserve after George's passing. Every crack in the foundation, every scuff on the floorboards, told a story of love and sacrifice. And now, Karen seemed determined to erase that story, to claim the house as her own, as if my presence were an inconvenient footnote. As I sat there, staring at the flickering streetlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Karen's hostility than mere annoyance. There had to be a reason she was so eager to push me out, to label me a beggar in my own home. I remembered a conversation a few months back when she'd casually mentioned updating the deed to the house, suggesting it might be safer in her and Robert's name. I'd brushed it off at the time, thinking she was just being practical, but now her words echoed in my mind with a sinister edge. Was it greed driving her? Did she see this house not as a family heirloom, but as a prize to be claimed? Or was there something deeper, some resentment she'd harbored for years, waiting for the right moment to unleash it? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. I looked up to see my old friend Margaret, walking her golden retriever, Daisy, down the sidewalk. Margaret had been my neighbor for over 30 years, a widow like me, and someone who understood the quiet loneliness of aging. Her face, lined with gentle wrinkles, softened with concern as she saw me sitting there, shoulders hunched. "Evelyn, what on earth are you doing out here in the cold?" she asked, her voice warm but tinged with worry. Daisy wagged her tail, nudging my hand for a pat, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of comfort. I hesitated, not wanting to burden her with my troubles, but the weight of the evening was too much to bear alone. "It's Karen," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. She called security on me during dinner, told them to get that beggar away from the table. Right in front of everyone, Margaret. My own family." Margaret's eyes widened, and she sat down beside me on the bench, her hand resting on my arm. "Oh, Evelyn, that's awful. I can't believe she'd do something so cruel." "What did Robert say? Surely he didn't just sit there?" I shook my head, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "He didn't say a word. He just let it happen. I don't know what's gotten into them, Margaret. I've tried so hard to keep this family together, to keep our traditions alive, but it feels like they're slipping through my fingers. Karen looks at me like I'm a nuisance, like I don't belong in my own home. And Robert, he's too afraid to stand up to her. I don't know how to fix this." Margaret sighed, her gaze distant as she scratched Daisy's ears. "Family can be a tricky thing, Evelyn. Sometimes the people we love the most hurt us the deepest. But you've got a good heart. And a strong one too. Don't let Karen's bitterness take that away from you. Maybe it's time to have a real talk with Robert, away from her. Get to the bottom of why he's letting this happen." Her words lingered in the air as I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure I had the courage to confront my son just yet. The idea of facing him, of asking why he'd allowed Karen to humiliate me, felt like opening a wound I wasn't ready to face. But Margaret was right, I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I thanked her for listening, promising to think about what she'd said, and watched as she and Daisy continued down the street, their figures fading into the twilight. Alone again, I turned my gaze back to the house. The dining room light was still on, and I could imagine Karen at the head of the table, playing the perfect hostess as if nothing had happened. The thought made my stomach churn. I stood, brushing off my skirt, and decided I couldn't stay out here all night. I'd go back inside, not to confront them, not yet, but to reclaim my space, even if just for a moment. This was my home, my sanctuary, and I wouldn't let Karen's venom drive me out completely. As I walked up the driveway, my resolve hardened, but so did my unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was just the beginning of something uglier. Karen's actions weren't random. There was intent behind them, a calculated cruelty I didn't yet understand. And as I reached for the doorknob, I heard her voice through the cracked window, low and conspiratorial, speaking to someone, Robert, perhaps. "We can't keep dragging this out," she said, her tone icy. "The sooner we get her out, the sooner we can move forward with the plans." My blood ran cold. Plans? What plans? I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear more, but the conversation faded into murmurs. My mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Was she talking about the house? About forcing me into a nursing home? Or was there something even darker at play? Something I couldn't yet fathom? I slipped inside quietly, avoiding the dining room, and made my way to the small den at the back of the house. It was a room filled with memories: George's old armchair, the quilt I'd sewn for our first anniversary, the shelf of photo albums I'd spent countless afternoons flipping through. I sank into the chair, clutching one of the albums to my chest, as if it could shield me from the storm brewing in my own home. The house, this sacred space, was the heart of my conflict with Karen. It wasn't just property to me. It was my legacy, my connection to George, to our children, to the life we'd built. And I had a sinking feeling that Karen saw it as nothing more than a stepping stone to something she wanted, something she was willing to destroy me to get. The next few days passed in a tense haze. I avoided Karen as much as possible, keeping to my routines: morning walks, sorting through old keepsakes, watering the garden. But her presence loomed like a shadow. She'd walk past me in the hallway with a smirk, as if daring me to challenge her. She'd leave pointed notes on the fridge about keeping the house tidy, as if I were a tenant who needed reminding. And Robert, my silent son, continued to avert his eyes, offering weak smiles but no real support. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, trapped by the very family I'd poured my heart into. It wasn't until the following Sunday that the tension reached its breaking point. Another family dinner, another attempt to hold on to tradition, though my hope for reconciliation was dwindling. I'd spend the morning preparing a pot roast, a recipe George had loved, hoping the familiar scent might soften the air between us. But as we sat down, Karen's demeanor was colder than ever. She barely touched her food, her fork scraping against the plate with deliberate irritation. Finally, she set it down with a clatter, her eyes locking onto mine with a venom that made my skin crawl. "Evelyn," she said, her voice low but laced with malice, "let's stop pretending. You're not fooling anyone with this poor old lady act. We all know you're just clinging to this house because you've got nothing else. But it's time to face reality. You're a burden, and frankly, we'd all be better off if you'd just go." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. I felt as if the ground had dropped out from under me, my breath catching in my throat. Robert stared at his plate, his knuckles white around his fork, but he said nothing. My grandchildren, wide-eyed and confused, looked between us, unsure of what to make of their mother's cruelty. And Karen, emboldened by the silence, leaned forward, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "You're not wanted here," she hissed. "You're nothing but a beggar at our table. So why don't you do us all a favor and leave before we have to make you?" Her words were a dagger, slicing through every memory, every hope I'd held onto. I sat there frozen. as the reality of her betrayal sank in. This wasn't just about a disagreement or a clash of personalities. This was a declaration of war, a calculated move to strip me of everything I held dear. And as I looked into her cold, unfeeling eyes, I knew this was only the beginning. The fight for my home, my family, my dignity, it was far from over. But in that moment, as tears burned behind my eyes, I made a silent vow. I would not let her win, not without a fight. My hands clenched into fists under the table, the edges of my nails digging into my palms as Karen's venomous words echoed in the dining room. "You're not wanted here. You're nothing but a beggar at our table. So why don't you do us all a favor and leave before we have to make you?" Her voice, dripping with contempt, seemed to reverberate off the walls, the same walls that had once held the laughter of my children and the warmth of family gatherings. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the faint clink of a fork against a plate as one of my grandchildren shifted uncomfortably in their seat. I could feel their eyes on me, wide and uncertain, but I couldn't bring myself to look at them. Not yet. Not while the sting of Karen's words burned through me like wildfire. I sat there, frozen, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Every memory of this house, every moment of love and sacrifice George and I had poured into it, seemed to flash before my eyes, only to be tainted by the cruelty of this moment. A beggar, that's what she called me. In my own home, at the table where I'd fed her, comforted her, welcomed her into our family all those years ago when she was just a nervous young woman dating my son. How had it come to this? How had the girl who'd once blushed and thanked me for teaching her how to make George's favorite apple pie turned into this cold, calculating stranger? My gaze flicked to Robert, my son, my boy, sitting at the far end of the table. His head was bowed, his fork still clutched tightly in his hand, but he hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't even looked up to meet my eyes. The sight of him, so passive, so unwilling to stand up for me, twisted the knife deeper into my chest. I wanted to scream at him, to demand why he was letting this happen, why he was letting his wife tear me apart in front of our family. But my throat was tight, my voice trapped behind a wall of hurt and disbelief. Karen, sensing my silence as weakness, leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She thought she'd won. She thought I'd crumble under the weight of her words, pack my bags, and slink away like the unwanted guest she'd painted me to be. But something inside me, something raw and fierce, began to stir. I wasn't just some frail old woman to be discarded. I was Evelyn Harper, the woman who'd raised a family, weathered storms, and held onto this home through every hardship life had thrown at me. I wasn't about to let her strip me of my dignity, my history, my place in this family. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and slowly pushed my chair back. The scrape of the legs against the hardwood floor was loud in the tense silence, drawing every eye to me. I stood, my knees trembling not from fear but from the surge of resolve building inside me. I looked directly at Karen, meeting her icy stare with a fire I hadn't felt in years. "No," I said, my voice low but firm, cutting through the stillness like a blade. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, Karen. Mine and George's. We built it with our own hands, our own dreams, and I've fought to keep it standing long after he was gone. You don't get to decide whether I belong here. You don't get to call me a beggar at my own table." Her smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before she masked it with a scoff. "Oh, Evelyn, please, spare us the dramatics. You're living in the past, clinging to a house that's too big for you to manage. You're a liability, and deep down, you know it. Why don't you just admit it's time to move on? We're only trying to help you. Help me?" The audacity of her words made my blood boil. I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks, the anger I'd suppressed for so long bubbling to the surface. "Help me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Is that what you call this? Humiliating me in front of my family? Calling security to drag me out of my own dining room? That's not help, Karen. That's cruelty. And I won't stand for it." The room seemed to hold its breath, the tension so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing down on us. My grandchildren, Little Emma and Jack looked between us with wide, confused eyes, their innocence caught in the crossfire of this ugly battle. I hated that they had to witness this, hated that their memories of family dinners might be tainted by their mother's bitterness. But I couldn't back down now, not when everything I held dear was at stake. Karen's expression hardened, her jaw tightening as she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Evelyn. We've been patient, more than patient, but enough is enough. It's time for you to let go of this house. It's not yours anymore, not really. Robert and I have been the ones maintaining it, paying the bills, keeping it from falling apart while you sit around reminiscing about the good old days. So let's stop pretending. I've had the papers drawn up to transfer the deed to our name. All you need to do is sign them, and we'll take care of everything. You can move into a nice little assisted living place somewhere more suitable for someone your age. It's the best solution for everyone." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, the audacity of her demand stealing the breath from my lungs. Transfer the deed? Sign away my home, my legacy, the very heart of everything George and I had built together. The house wasn't just a building to me, it was a living memory, a testament to our love, our struggles, our triumphs. Every room held a piece of our story: the nursery where Robert had taken his first steps, the kitchen where George and I had danced on rainy afternoons, the garden where we'd buried our beloved dog, Max, under the oak tree. And Karen wanted to take it all away, to reduce it to a piece of paper, a transaction, as if it meant nothing more to her than a line item on a balance sheet. I stared at her, my mind reeling, my heart racing with a mix of fury and disbelief. This wasn't just about control or resentment anymore. This was greed, pure and simple. She didn't see this house as a family heirloom. She saw it as a prize, a stepping stone to whatever future she'd envisioned for herself and Robert. And she was willing to trample over me, over everything I held sacred, to get it. "No," I said again, my voice stronger this time, trembling not with fear but with unyielding determination. "I will not sign anything. This house is mine, Karen. It's the last piece of George I have, the last piece of the life we built together. You can't take that from me. You won't take that from me. I don't care how many papers you've drawn up or how many times you call me a burden. I'm not leaving, and I'm not signing away my home." Karen's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line as she stood, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh screech. She stepped closer to me, her presence looming, her voice low and menacing. "You're being selfish, Evelyn. Do you really think you're doing Robert any favors by holding on to this place? Do you think he wants to be stuck here, babysitting you, when we could sell it and use the money to build a better life for our children? You're not just clinging to a house, you're clinging to a fantasy, and it's dragging us all down with you." Her words were a calculated strike, meant to guilt me into submission, to make me feel like I was the one tearing this family apart. But I wouldn't let her manipulate me. I straightened my spine, meeting her gaze with a defiance I hadn't known I still possessed. "Selfish?" I shot back, my voice sharp. "You're the one trying to steal my home out from under me, Karen. You're the one who's turned family dinners into battlegrounds, who's treated me like an intruder in the house I've lived in for over 50 years. If anyone's dragging this family down, it's you. Your greed, your cruelty, it's poison, and I won't let it destroy what George and I built." For the first time, I saw a crack in her armor, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes as my words hit their mark. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. She turned to Robert, her voice snapping like a whip. "Robert, are you just going to sit there? Say something. Tell her she's being unreasonable. Tell her it's time to let go." My heart clenched as I turned to my son, my last hope, my last tether to the family I'd fought so hard to hold together. "Robert," I said softly, my voice breaking with the weight of my plea. "Please. You know what this house means to me. You grew up here. You know how much your father and I sacrificed to make it a home for you. Don't let her do this. Don't let her take it away from us." Robert finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time that evening. I saw pain there, conflict, a storm of emotions I couldn't fully read. For a moment, I thought he might speak up, might stand by my side, might be the son I'd raised to value family above all else. But then he looked away, his shoulders slumping, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, I don't know. Maybe Karen's right. Maybe it would be easier for everyone if we made some changes. I just want what's best for the family. His words were a betrayal, a final blow that shattered the last shred of hope I'd been clinging to. I felt the tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. Not here, not in front of Karen, who was watching me with a predatory glint in her eye, reveling in her victory. Robert's silence, his refusal to stand up for me, left me utterly alone in this fight. My son, the boy I'd cradled in my arms, the man I'd trusted to protect our family's legacy, had chosen to stand by while his wife tore it apart. The weight of his inaction settled over me like a shroud, heavy and suffocating, but it also steeled my resolve. If no one else would fight for me, I would fight for myself. I turned back to Karen, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. You can twist Robert's arm all you want, Karen, but you won't twist mine. I'm not signing anything. I'm not leaving. And if you think you can force me out, you're going to have to drag me out yourself, because I will not go quietly. This is my home, and I'll defend it with everything I have. Karen's face contorted with rage, her composure slipping as she took a step closer, her finger jabbing the air in front of me. You're making a mistake, Evelyn. A big one. You think you're some kind of martyr, holding onto this crumbling old house like it's a shrine? You're pathetic. And if you won't sign the papers willingly, we'll find another way. I've already started the process to have you declared unfit to live on your own. One call to social services, one report about how you're a danger to yourself, and they'll have you out of here faster than you can blink. So go ahead. Keep fighting. It'll only make things worse for you. Her threat hung in the air, chilling me to the bone. Declared unfit? Social services? The idea that she would stoop so low, that she would weaponize my age against me, was beyond comprehension. But as I looked into her cold, unfeeling eyes, I knew she meant every word. This wasn't just a power play anymore. It was a war, and she was willing to use every dirty trick in the book to win. That was the moment I snapped. Something inside me broke free, a dam of suppressed anger and grief bursting open. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, my voice rising with a ferocity I hadn't known I still possessed. How dare you, Karen? How dare you threaten me in my own home? You think you can scare me with your lies, with your manipulations? I've seen through you from the moment you started this campaign to push me out. You're not doing this for Robert, or for the children, or for the family. You're doing it for yourself. You're greedy, selfish, and heartless, and I'm ashamed to think I ever welcomed you into this family. You've taken my kindness, my generosity, and thrown it back in my face. You've turned my son against me, humiliated me in front of my grandchildren, and now you think you can threaten to have me locked away like some crazy old woman? You're a disgrace to this family, to everything George and I stood for, and I will not let you destroy our legacy. My words seemed to echo in the room, each one a blow that landed squarely on Karen's stunned expression. For the first time, I saw genuine shock in her eyes, as if she hadn't expected me to fight back with such force. The room was silent, save for the ragged sound of my breathing, the adrenaline coursing through me making my hands tremble. My grandchildren stared at me, their mouths slightly open, while Robert's head snapped up, his face pale, as if he'd finally realized the gravity of what was happening. Karen recovered quickly, her shock morphing into a sneer as she straightened, her voice dripping with disdain. You're unhinged, Evelyn. Completely unhinged. Keep talking like that, and you'll only prove my point. You're not fit to be here, and everyone in this room can see it. You're a relic, a burden, and the sooner you're out of our lives, the better. But her words didn't sting as much as they had before. I'd said my piece, laid bare the truth of her betrayal, and in doing so, I'd reclaimed a piece of my power. I wasn't just a helpless old woman to be pushed around anymore. I was Evelyn Harper, and I was ready to fight for what was mine. I took a step back, my gaze never leaving hers, and said, "Try it, Karen. Try whatever you think you can do. But I'm not going anywhere. This house, this family, it's worth more to me than you'll ever understand. And I'll fight you every step of the way." With that, I turned and walked out of the dining room, my heart pounding but my head held high. I could feel their eyes on me, Karen's burning with hatred, Robert's filled with guilt, my grandchildren's wide with confusion, but I didn't look back. I made my way to the den, the small sanctuary at the back of the house, and sank into George's old armchair, the familiar scent of worn leather grounding me. My hands were still shaking, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the realization that I'd just crossed a threshold. There was no going back now. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was in this fight alone. As I sat there, clutching one of the old photo albums to my chest, I thought of George. I thought of the promises we'd made to each other, the life we'd built, the home we'd created as a safe haven for our family. I could almost hear his voice, steady and reassuring, telling me to hold on, to keep fighting. And I would. For him, for myself, for the legacy we'd poured our hearts into. Karen might think she'd won this round, but she didn't know the strength I had left in me. She didn't know that I'd spent a lifetime overcoming obstacles, weathering storms, and I wasn't about to stop now. The days that followed were a tense standoff. Karen's presence in the house became even more oppressive, her every glance a silent threat, her every word laced with barely veiled hostility. She left the paperwork for the deed transfer on the kitchen counter one morning, a pen placed neatly beside it, as if taunting me to give in. I tore it up and left the pieces in the trash, a small act of defiance that I knew would infuriate her. Robert, meanwhile, avoided me altogether, his guilt palpable but his silence unbroken. I tried to reach out to him once, late at night when Karen was asleep, but he only mumbled something about needing time before retreating to their bedroom. His refusal to engage, to stand by me, hurt more than I could put into words, but it also fueled my determination. If he wouldn't fight for me, I'd fight for myself. I started taking precautions, small steps to protect myself and my home. I called Margaret and confided in her about Karen's threats, asking for advice on how to safeguard my rights. She connected me with a local lawyer, a kind older man who specialized in elder law, and he assured me that Karen couldn't have me declared unfit without substantial evidence and a lengthy legal process. He advised me to document everything, every interaction, every threat, every attempt to coerce me into signing away the house. I began keeping a journal, writing down the details of each encounter, no matter how small, as a record of the war being waged under my own roof. I also reached out to an old friend from church, a retired social worker named Linda, who offered to help me navigate any potential involvement from social services. She warned me that Karen might follow through on her threat to make a report, but she also reassured me that I had rights, that I wasn't defenseless. With each conversation, each piece of advice, I felt a little more fortified, a little more prepared to stand my ground. But even as I armed myself with knowledge and support, the weight of the conflict bore down on me. The house, once my sanctuary, felt like a battlefield, every creak of the floorboards a reminder of the tension simmering just beneath the surface. I found solace in the garden, tending to the lavender and roses George had planted with me decades ago, their familiar scent a balm to my frayed nerves. I'd sit on the bench by the mailbox, watching the neighborhood go about its daily routines, and wonder how long I could keep this up, how long I could fight before the exhaustion, the loneliness, the betrayal broke me. It was during one of those quiet moments, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the streetlights flickered to life, that I made a decision. I couldn't keep living in fear, waiting for Karen's next move, wondering when she'd strike. I had to take control, to shift the balance of power in my favor. I didn't know yet what form that would take, whether it meant legal action, a confrontation with Robert, or something else entirely, but I knew I couldn't remain passive. The spark of rebellion had been lit, and it was burning brighter with each passing day. As I walked back to the house, my resolve hardened. Karen might think she held all the cards, but she underestimated me. She underestimated the strength of a woman who'd spent a lifetime building a family, a home, a legacy. This was my fight, and I was ready to see it through, no matter the cost. The battle for my home, my dignity, my place in this family, it was far from over, and I would not go down without a fight. As I walked back to the house, my resolve hardened. Karen might think she held all the cards, but she underestimated me. She underestimated the strength of a woman who'd spent a lifetime building a family, a home, a legacy. This was my fight, and I was ready to see it through, no matter the cost. The battle for my home, my dignity, my place in this family, it was far from over, and I would not go down without a fight. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The fog of hurt and anger had lifted just enough for me to see the path ahead. I couldn't keep reacting to Karen's provocations, always on the defensive, always scrambling to protect what was mine. I needed a plan, a real strategy. One that would not only safeguard my home but also expose Karen's manipulations for what they were. Sitting at the small desk in the den, I pulled out a notepad and began to write down everything I'd discussed with Margaret and Linda, every piece of advice, every warning. I needed to arm myself with knowledge, with allies, with the kind of power Karen couldn't undermine with her sneers and threats. My first call was to the lawyer Margaret had recommended, Mr. Harold Bennett. His voice on the phone was calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in my life. I explained everything: Karen's attempts to pressure me into signing over the deed, her threats to have me declared unfit, the way she'd turned Robert against me. I told him about the house, how it wasn't just property to me but a living piece of my history with George, a legacy I intended to pass down to my grandchildren, not to be sold off for Karen's gain. Mr. Bennett listened patiently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, and when I finished, he didn't sugarcoat the situation. "Evelyn, what you're describing is a clear attempt at coercion, possibly even elder abuse," he said, his tone serious but reassuring. "Karen can't force you to transfer the deed, and her threat to involve social services is a scare tactic. In the United States, declaring someone unfit to live independently requires a formal evaluation, medical evidence, and a court hearing. It's not something she can just snap her fingers and make happen. That said, we need to act proactively to protect your rights and your property. I'd like to meet with you in person to review the deed, your will, and any other relevant documents. We can also discuss a restraining order if her behavior escalates, and I'll help you draft a formal statement asserting your ownership and intent to remain in the home." His words were a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't powerless, that the law was on my side. We scheduled a meeting for the following day at his office downtown, and I hung up the phone with a renewed sense of purpose. But I knew legal action was only part of the battle. I needed to protect myself on all fronts, to anticipate Karen's next move. That afternoon, I called Linda, the retired social worker from church, and asked her to come over. She arrived with a folder full of resources and a warm smile that eased some of the tension knotting my shoulders. "Evelyn, I'm glad you reached out," she said as we sat in the den with cups of tea. "I've seen situations like this before, where family members use intimidation to manipulate older adults into giving up their autonomy. Karen's threats about social services are a common tactic, but they're empty without proof of neglect or danger. That doesn't mean she won't try to fabricate something, though. My advice is to keep a detailed record of your daily activities, meals, errands, interactions with neighbors, to show you're capable and independent. And if she does make a report, don't panic. Social workers are trained to assess the full picture, and I can be there as an advocate if needed." Linda also suggested I install a small security camera in the common areas of the house, not to spy, but to have evidence if Karen escalated her behavior. "It's legal in most states as long as it's in a shared space and not a private room," she explained. "Just check with your lawyer to be sure. It could protect you if she tries to stage an incident to support her claims." I nodded, taking notes, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and exhaustion. This wasn't the life I'd imagined at 72, turning my home into a fortress, documenting every move to prove I wasn't a burden. But I had no choice. Karen had declared war, and I had to be ready for whatever she threw at me next. Over the next few days, I followed through on every piece of advice. I met with Mr. Bennett, who reviewed the deed still firmly in my name and confirmed that Karen had no legal claim to the house unless I willingly signed it over, which I had no intention of doing. He helped me update my will to explicitly state my wishes for the property to be passed to Robert and my grandchildren, with stipulations to prevent its immediate sale. He also drafted a cease and desist letter to Karen, formally warning her against further harassment or attempts to coerce me into relinquishing my rights. "This is a first step," he said, handing me the document. "If she ignores it, we can escalate to a restraining order or even pursue charges for elder abuse. But let's hope it doesn't come to that." I also started keeping a meticulous journal, as Linda suggested, logging everything from my morning walks to the times Karen left snide notes or made cutting remarks. I ordered a discreet security camera online and had it installed in the living room, angled to capture the entryway and dining area. It felt invasive, wrong somehow, to monitor my own home like this, but I reminded myself it was for protection, not paranoia. Each step, each precaution, built a wall of defense around me, a shield against Karen's malice. But it also drained me. The constant vigilance, the weight of distrust, the loneliness of fighting this battle without Robert's support, it was taking a toll. That's when I decided I needed to step away, if only for a little while. Not to run from the fight, but to gain perspective, to recharge before the next confrontation. I called Margaret and asked if I could stay with her for a few days. "Of course, Evelyn," she said without hesitation. "You know you're always welcome. Pack a bag and come over whenever you're ready." Her kindness brought tears to my eyes, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone, even if my own family had turned their backs on me. I packed lightly, just a few changes of clothes in my journal, and left a note on the kitchen counter for Robert. It was simple, direct. "I'm staying with a friend for a few days. I need space to think. We'll talk when I'm back." I didn't mention Karen, didn't give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd driven me out, even temporarily. Before I left, I made sure the camera was running and locked the den, where I kept my important documents, with a key I carried with me. Then, with a heavy heart but a determined mind, I walked out the door, the weight of the house lifting off my shoulders for the first time in weeks. Staying with Margaret was like stepping into a different world. Her home was small but cozy, filled with the scent of baking bread and the sound of Daisy's playful barks. For the first time in what felt like forever, I slept through the night without waking to the dread of what the next day might bring. Margaret didn't pry, didn't push me to talk, but she was there with a listening ear when I needed it. Over cups of chamomile tea on her porch, I poured out my fears, my anger, my heartbreak over Robert's silence. "I just don't understand how he can let her treat me this way," I said, my voice breaking. "He's my son. Doesn't he remember everything I've done for him, for our family?" Margaret sighed, her hand resting on mine. "Sometimes, Evelyn, people get caught in their own fears. Robert might be afraid of losing Karen, of disrupting his life, of facing conflict. It's not right, but it's human. That doesn't mean he doesn't love you. It just means he's lost his way for now. Give him time. Keep fighting for what's yours, and maybe he'll come around." Her words stayed with me, a flicker of hope in the darkness. But I couldn't rely on maybe. I spent those days at Margaret's not just resting, but planning. I reviewed my notes, spoke with Mr. Bennett over the phone to finalize the cease and desist letter, and even met with Linda again to discuss how to handle a potential social services investigation. I also started researching local support groups for seniors facing family conflicts, finding a community center that offered free workshops on legal rights and emotional coping strategies. Each piece of information, each connection, felt like a brick in the foundation I was rebuilding for myself. Meanwhile, back at the house, Karen's behavior, unbeknownst to her, was being recorded. When I returned after 5 days, I checked the footage from the security camera, my stomach churning with a mix of dread and anticipation. What I saw confirmed my worst suspicions. Karen, thinking I was gone for good, had grown bolder in her malice. There she was, on the second day of my absence, rifling through my desk drawers in the living room, clearly searching for something, perhaps the deed or my will. She muttered to herself, her voice low but picked up by the camera's microphone. If she's not here to stop us, we might as well get this over with. Robert, come help me look. We need to find those papers before she comes back. Robert appeared in the frame, hesitant, his face pale, but he didn't protest. He just stood there, watching as Karen continued her search, his silence as damning as ever. But it was the next clip that sent a chill down my spine. On the fourth day, Karen was on the phone in the dining room, her voice sharp and conspiratorial. Yes, I'd like to report a concern about an elderly woman living alone in my home. She's not well, forgetful, a danger to herself. I'm worried she might hurt herself or someone else. Can someone come out to evaluate her? My blood ran cold as I realized she was following through on her threat, attempting to involve social services with fabricated claims. The footage was grainy, but her words were clear, her intent undeniable. This wasn't just a power play anymore. It was a calculated attempt to strip me of my autonomy, to paint me as incompetent so she could seize control of the house. I saved the footage to a USB drive, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and vindication. This was the evidence I needed, the irrefutable proof of Karen's deceit and malice. I called Mr. Bennett immediately, explaining what I'd found. "This is gold, Evelyn," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "With this footage, we can not only counter any false claims she makes to social services, but we can also build a case for harassment and attempted fraud. I'll draft a formal complaint and request an emergency injunction to prevent her from taking further action against you or the property. We'll also send the cease and desist letter with a reference to this evidence, making it clear we're prepared to escalate if she doesn't back off." For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of real hope, a sense that the tide was turning in my favor. The footage, combined with the legal documents Mr. Bennett was preparing, became my document of power, a shield and a sword in this battle for my home. But I knew the fight wasn't over. I had to confront Karen, to lay down the law with the weight of evidence and legal backing behind me. And I had to do it soon, before she could spin more lies or manipulate the situation further. I decided to return to the house the next evening, after Mr. Bennett had finalized the paperwork. I arrived just as the sun was setting, the golden light casting long shadows across the driveway. The house looked the same as always, its familiar silhouette a bittersweet reminder of better days, but I felt different, stronger, more resolute. I carried the USB drive in my purse, along with copies of the cease and desist letter and the injunction request, a tangible weight of power in my hands. As I stepped through the front door, I heard voices from the dining room, Karen's sharp tone, Robert's quieter murmurs. They were having dinner, the clink of cutlery a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight into the dining room, my presence startling them into silence. Karen's eyes narrowed as she saw me, her fork pausing mid-air. "So, you're back," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I thought you'd finally gotten the hint and left for good." I didn't flinch. I set my purse on the table, pulling out the envelope with the cease and desist letter and placing it in front of her. "I'm not going anywhere, Karen," I said, my voice steady and clear. "This is my home, and I'm done letting you treat me like an intruder. This letter is from my lawyer. It's a formal warning to stop harassing me, to stop attempting to coerce me into signing over the deed, and to stop making baseless threats about my competency. If you ignore it, we're prepared to take legal action, including charges for elder abuse and attempted fraud." Her face paled for a moment, but she quickly masked it with a scoff, pushing the envelope away. "You think a piece of paper is going to stop me? You're delusional, Evelyn. You're not fit to be here, and everyone knows it. I've already contacted social services. They'll be here any day now to see just how independent you really are." I smiled, a small, cold smile, and pulled out the USB drive, holding it up for her to see. "I thought you might say that, which is why I have evidence of your lies. I've recorded you, Karen, searching through my things, plotting to take my home, making false reports to social services. It's all here, clear as day. My lawyer has a copy, and we're prepared to use it to counter any claims you make. You've overplayed your hand, and now you're going to face the consequences. So, I suggest you read that letter carefully, Because this is your last chance to back off before things get much worse for you." The room was silent, the weight of my words settling over everyone like a heavy fog. Karen's smirk vanished, her eyes darting to the USB drive, then back to me, a flicker of fear crossing her face. Robert, for the first time, looked up, his expression a mix of shock and guilt. My grandchildren, seated at the far end of the table, stared wide-eyed, sensing the gravity of the moment even if they didn't fully understand it. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She was cornered, and she knew it. Finally, she snatched the envelope from the table, tearing it open with trembling hands, her face contorted with rage as she skimmed the contents. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, but her voice lacked its usual venom. "You can't prove anything. This is just a desperate attempt to cling to something that's not even yours anymore." "It's mine, Karen," I said, my voice firm, "and it will stay mine. You've tried to bully me, to manipulate me, to turn my family against me. But I'm not the helpless old woman you thought I was. I've fought for this home my entire life, and I'll keep fighting for it until my last breath. So, you can either respect that, or you can face the consequences of your actions in court. The choice is yours." I turned to Robert then, my heart aching as I met his eyes. "And you, Robert? I've waited for you to stand up for me, to remember what this house means to our family, to remember the sacrifices your father and I made for you. I'm still waiting, but I won't beg for your loyalty. I'm fighting this battle with or without you. I just hope one day you'll see the truth and find the courage to do what's right." Robert's face crumpled, his eyes dropping to the table, but he didn't speak. The silence stretched on, heavy and painful, until Karen stood abruptly, tossing the letter onto the table. "Fine," she spat. "Have it your way, Evelyn. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." She stormed out of the room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway, leaving a palpable tension in her wake. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, my legs suddenly weak. But I didn't sit. I stood tall, looking at my grandchildren, who seemed small and uncertain in the aftermath of the confrontation. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I said softly, "but I want you to know that I love you. And I'm fighting for this home so you can always have a place to come back to, a place full of memories of your grandpa and me. That's all I've ever wanted." Emma, my youngest grandchild, nodded slowly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you, Grandma," she whispered, and it was enough to keep me going, to remind me why this fight mattered. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Karen, faced with the cease and desist letter and the threat of legal action backed by irrefutable evidence, backed off. She stopped leaving notes, stopped making snide comments, though her glares were still sharp enough to cut. Mr. Bennett informed me that social services had indeed received a report, but after a brief visit during which Linda was present as my advocate, they concluded there was no evidence of neglect or danger. The case was closed, and Karen's attempt to weaponize my age against me failed spectacularly. But the real victory, the one that mattered most, came unexpectedly one evening as I sat in the garden, tending to the lavender George had loved so much. Robert approached, his steps hesitant, his face etched with a guilt I hadn't seen him acknowledge before. He sat beside me on the bench, staring at the ground for a long moment before speaking. "Mom, I'm sorry. I've been a coward. I let Karen push me into things I knew were wrong, and I didn't stand up for you when I should have. I was scared of losing my family, of making things worse. But I see now how much I've hurt you, how much I've let Dad down by not protecting what you both built. I don't know if you can forgive me, but I want to make this right. I'll talk to Karen. I'll make her understand that this house is yours, that we need to respect your wishes. And if she can't, well, I'll figure out what that means for us. But I'm on your side now, I promise." His words, raw and sincere, broke through the last wall I'd built around my heart. Tears streamed down my face as I reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Robert, I've always loved you, even when it hurt. I just needed to know you remembered who we are, what this family stands for. We'll figure this out together. That's all I've ever wanted." That night, As I sat in George's old armchair in the den, a photo album open on my lap, I felt a peace I hadn't known in months. The house was quiet, the tension that had once permeated every room finally easing. I traced my fingers over a photo of George and me on our wedding day, smiling at the memory of his laughter, his strength, the promises we'd made to each other. I'd fought for our legacy, for the home we'd built, and I'd won not just against Karen's greed, but against the despair that had threatened to consume me. I placed a single lavender sprig from the garden between the pages of the album, a small act of remembrance, a symbol of the peace I'd reclaimed. This house, this sanctuary, was mine again, and with Robert by my side, I knew we could rebuild the family ties that had been strained to the breaking point. And so, my story comes to a close, but not without a final thought for you. I fought for my home, for my dignity, and in the end, justice prevailed, even if it was a hard-won battle. If this story resonated with you, please leave it like it means the world to me. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up to family in defense of what's right? How did you find the strength to keep going? Share your experiences with me. And of course, don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience and triumph. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the ones you love.